Shaquille O'Neal stepped out of a luxurious hotel in the heart of the city sunlight reflecting off his sleek tailored suit. As he made his way toward the gleaming black SUV waiting for him, a frail, thin, pale little girl suddenly darted forward and clung tightly to his leg. Before Shaq could utter a word, the girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with panic and desperation, a look that would change everything. Can you guess what happened next? If you love inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. The golden hues of sunset bathed the glass skyscrapers downtown as the day drew to a close. Shaquille O'Neal, dressed impeccably in his suit, emerged from the grand glass doors of a luxury hotel. His towering figure immediately caught the attention of the bustling crowd. The charity event he had attended had been a resounding success, and now his sleek black SUV was parked at the curb, ready to take him home. Amid the urban hustle, the honking of cars, and the constant flow of pedestrians, Shaq kept a relaxed smile as he chatted with his driver, Marcus. He was just bending down to step into the car when suddenly a small figure darted out from the crowd. The child couldn't have been more than 10 years old, her scrawny frame accentuated by bare dirt-streaked feet. What struck Shaq most was her pallid, sickly complexion. Without a word, she clung tightly to his leg, her body trembling, her wide eyes darting nervously over her shoulder, as though fleeing something terrifying. Shaq crouched down, his deep, warm voice cutting through the tension. "Are you okay? What's going on?" The girl remained silent, avoiding his gaze. Her tiny hands clutched his pant leg, as if clinging to a fragile thread of hope. Before Shaq could press further, an angry voice rang out from across the street. "Stop right there, you little troublemaker." A middle-aged man in a grease-stained apron came hurrying toward them, his flushed face contorted with annoyance. Startled, the girl let go of Shaq's leg and bolted into the crowd, disappearing so quickly that Shaq only caught a fleeting glimpse of her retreating figure. The man approached, panting heavily, seemingly oblivious to who he was addressing. "That kid, she's always hanging around my shop, never buys anything, just touches everything, and bothers my customers. This time I'm calling the cops." Shay raised an eyebrow, his irritation barely veiled. He responded in a calm yet firm tone. "Did she steal something from you?" The man faltered, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. "Well, not exactly, but she keeps pacing around, staring at the shelves, making my customers uneasy. Kids like her just bring trouble." Shaq crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. His mind replayed the haunting look in the girl's eyes, a mix of fear, desperation, and a silent plea for help. The man opened his mouth to complain further, but froze when he realized he was speaking to Shaquille O'Neal. Stammering an apology, he quickly walked away. Shay remained rooted beside the SUV, his eyes scanning the direction the girl had fled. A deep sense of curiosity and compassion stirred within him. One question lingered in his mind: what was she running from? And why does she need help so badly? Shaquille O'Neal stood still for a few seconds, his eyes fixed on the little girl who had just vanished into the crowd. A strange feeling washed over him, a pull he couldn't ignore. Turning to his driver, Marcus, his voice was steady and deep. "Marcus, slow down. We need to find that girl." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but quickly nodded. Having worked for Shaq for years, he was used to unexpected requests from his boss. Even if this one felt unusual, the black SUV rolled slowly through the bustling streets of downtown. Outside the window, the cacophony of the city buzzed, the chatter of pedestrians, the honking of horns, and the relentless rhythm of urban life blending into a chaotic symphony. Shaq kept his eyes glued to the sidewalks, scanning every alley and corner, searching for the small figure with the shaven head that had etched itself into his memory. "Where do you think she might have gone?" Marcus asked, his gaze fixed on the traffic ahead. "I don't know," Shaq replied, his eyes never leaving the sidewalk. "But she needs help. Something spooked her so badly she had to run. I need to know what's going on." After nearly 10 minutes of searching, Shaq spotted a small figure huddled on the curb near a convenience store. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized her. Emma. That's what he had begun calling her in his mind. Even though he didn't know her real name, was sitting on the sidewalk, clutching a small paper cup with a few coins inside. Her frail shoulders trembled under a thin and tattered jacket. The passers-by moved hurriedly around her, barely noticing her presence, as if she were just another invisible piece of the cityscape. Shay signaled Marcus to stop the car, and stepped out with his towering frame and commanding presence. His appearance instantly drew a few curious glances, but his focus was solely on the girl, walking slowly so as not to frighten her. Shaq crouched down, his deep voice soft and gentle. "Hi there, are you okay?" Emma looked up, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and fear. But this time she didn't run, she simply sat there, clutching the paper cup in her hands like a lifeline. Shaq sat down on the curb, lowering himself to her level to minimize the intimidating height difference. He offered a small smile. "My name's Shaq. Can you tell me your name?" After a moment's hesitation, she mumbled, "Emma." Shaq nodded, his gaze filled with empathy. "Emma, I saw you earlier. Do you need any help?" Emma didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted nervously around, as if expecting someone to appear out of nowhere. Shay followed her gate and noticed a man standing across the street, glaring in their direction. He looked like the store owner from earlier, his expression hard and accusatory. "Are you afraid of him?" Shaq asked, tilting his head slightly toward the man. Emma didn't reply, but the way she tightened her grip on the cup said it all. Taking a deep breath, Shah turned to Marcus, who was leaning against the SUV. "Marcus, keep an eye on things. Don't let anyone come near us." When Shaq's expression softened again, Emma seemed to sense that she was safe. Several minutes passed in silence before she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I need help, but not money." Shaq leaned closer, his concern deepening. "What do you need?" "Emma, tell me." Emma hesitated, then slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a large bruise and an odd discoloration running along her thin arm. A chill ran down Shaq's spine. "What's this?" "Emma, did someone hurt you?" Emma shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "The doctor said I need medicine, but I don't have money, and no one will help me." In that moment, it felt as though the world around Shaq fell silent. His gaze rested on Emma's trembling shoulders, and he knew he couldn't just walk away. Emma needed him more than that. She needed someone to care. "I'll help you, Emma," Shaq said firmly. "We're going to fix this right now." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of doubt and the faintest glimmer of hope. For the first time that day, she didn't shy away from his gaze. "Do you promise?" she asked softly. Shaq nodded, his expression resolute. "I promise." Shaquille O'Neal looked deeply into Emma's eyes, where a glimmer of hope had just sparked after his promise. Slowly standing up, he extended his hand toward her. "Come on, Emma. I'll take you somewhere safe." Emma hesitated for a moment, but the steady look in his eyes and his warm smile gave her a sense of comfort. She reached out and took his hand, her small trembling fingers dwarfed in his large palm. Marcus quickly opened the door of the SUV, and Shaq helped Emma climb inside. The SUV cruised through the bustling streets, the atmosphere inside tense yet quiet. Sitting next to Emma, Shaq observed her closely, noticing how her frail hands clutched at the hem of her shirt, as if trying to suppress her fear. "Emma, where do you live?" Shaq asked gently, though his voice betrayed his concern. "At St. Helena Orphanage." She replied softly, "But they don't have enough money to take care of me." Shaq frowned, leaning forward. "Can't take care of you? What do you mean?" Emma hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor of the vehicle. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a dark bruise stretching along her pale, dry skin. The deep, unnatural discoloration sent a chill down Shaq's spine. "The doctor said I'm sick. It's a type of cancer." Emma said, her voice trembling. "I need medicine, but the orphanage can afford it. I thought if I could collect enough money, maybe they'd help me." Shay stared at her, his eyes wide with shock and heartbreak. "A child so thin, so fragile, burdened with a struggle that no one should face alone. You've been asking for money to save yourself?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Emma nodded, her eyes filled with helplessness. "I don't want to bother anyone, but I don't want to die." She turned to Marcus, meeting his gaze in the rearview mirror, his voice firm. With resolve, "Marcus, drive straight to the nearest hospital. We can't wait." Marcus nodded and accelerated without a word. She turned back to Emma, gently placing one of his large hands on her thin shoulder. "Listen to me, Emma," he said, his voice warm yet steady. "You're not doing this alone anymore. I'll take care of everything, okay? All you need to do is be strong and trust me." Emma looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes, but now accompanied by a flicker of hope. "You'll really help me." She smiled, his expression sincere and reassuring. "I promise. And I never break my promises." When the SUV pulled up to the hospital, Shay scooped Emma into his arms, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. She felt as light as a feather in his steady embrace. Inside the Medical staff immediately recognized Shaquille O'Neal, but before anyone could utter a word, he firmly stated this child needs to be examined immediately. She can't wait another minute. The doctors rushed Emma into an examination room. While Shaq stood in the hallway, a storm of emotions swirling within him, he thought about how Emma had been fighting alone, not just against her illness, but against the indifference and cruelty of the world. Marcus approached him hesitantly. Shaq, what are you really planning to do? This kid doesn't just need a little money. She needs a long-term solution. Without hesitation, Shay turned to him, determination blazing in his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes, Marcus. No child should have to fight to survive on their own. When the examination room door opened and a doctor stepped out with a grave expression, Shaq knew that his journey with Emma was only beginning. The SUV sped through the bustling streetlights reflecting off the windows, casting faint streaks of light across Shaquille O'Neal's pensive face. Emma sat in the back seat, leaning against the window, her shallow breaths fueling Shaq's mounting concern. How are you feeling, Emma? Shaq asked gently, though his voice betrayed his tension. Emma tried to manage a weak smile. I'm okay, just a little tired. The car turned a corner, and Shaq glanced back at her. Her eyelids were starting to droop, her head tilted slightly to one side. He could feel the fragility of the young girl, as if a strong gust of wind could carry her away. When the car pulled up in front of a rundown building, an orphanage where Emma lived, Shay opened the door, ready to help her out. But as soon as he touched her shoulder, Emma collapsed into his arms. Shaq shouted, his voice filled with panic. He scooped her up, his strong arms effortlessly cradling her small feather-like frame. Marcus, drive to the nearest hospital, hurry. Shay yelled over his shoulder, his worry etched deeply into his face. The SUV tore through the streets, drawing curious glances from passers by. Inside, Shaq held Emma tightly, feeling the faint rhythm of her breaths. Stay with me, Emma, I'm right here, he murmured, as if his words alone could keep her conscious. At the hospital, medical staff rushed to take Emma, placing her on a stretcher and wheeling her straight to the emergency room. Shaq followed closely, each heavy step bearing the weight of his world. Doctor, please help her, Shaq pleaded, his voice raw with her urgency. A nurse placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to reassure him. We'll do our best, but you'll need to wait outside. Reluctantly, Shaq stopped, his eyes fixed on Emma as she disappeared through the large doors marked emergency unit. As Shaq waited, a middle-aged woman with silver streak hair hurried into the hospital lobby. Spotting Shay, she paused, then approached with a look of concern. Are you the one who brought Emma here? She asked, her voice warm but tinged with worry. Shay nodded yes. She fainted on the way. And you are? I'm Margaret, the manager of the orphanage where Emma lives, she replied, her sad eyes lowering to the floor. I just got a call from the nurse here. Is Emma? Is she okay? Shaq shook his head, struggling to remain composed. I don't know. The doctors are still examining her. Margaret sighed deeply, her trembling hands clutching an old worn handbag. Emma has endured so much. I'm afraid she can't hold on much longer without help. Shay met her gaze, sensing the despair in her voice. Can you tell me what's going on? What's wrong with her? Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down, her eyes heavy with years of hardship. Emma was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer 6 months ago. The malignant tumor has spread to her lymphatic system. The doctor said if she doesn't get treatment soon, she won't survive. But she trailed off, her voice breaking. But the orphanage doesn't have the money. She finished the sentence. She couldn't bring herself to say. Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. We've tried our best, but funds are tight. Emma overheard the doctor talking and figured out we couldn't afford the treatment. Since then, she's been sneaking out, trying to beg for money, hoping to save herself. I tried to stop her, but she's so stubborn. She's afraid of being a burden. Jack felt his heart clench painfully. He recalled the look in Emma's eyes when she said, I need help, but not money. The scattered pieces of her story came together in his mind, forming a heartbreaking picture of her struggles. At that moment, the emergency room doors swung open. A doctor stepped out, his expression grave. Are you the one who brought her in? Shaq nodded, stepping forward. I'm her guardian. How is Emma, doctor? The doctor looked at Shaq, his eyes somber. She's in critical condition. We've stabilized her for now, but Emma needs long-term treatment. The tumor has metastasized, and her chances aren't good without immediate intervention. Shaq clenched his fists. "Do whatever it takes. I'll cover all the expenses." The doctor looked surprised for a moment, but quickly nodded. "We'll do everything we can." Followed the doctor into the hospital room. As he approached the bed, Emma opened her eyes weakly, her small hand clutching the blanket tightly. "You won't leave me, will you?" she asked, her voice fragile, as though fearing the answer might shatter her last hope. Shaq leaned down, his gaze resolute. "Never, Emma. I promise you." Shaquille O'Neal stood silently beside Emma's hospital bed, his gaze fixed on the small pale face of the young girl, her frail voice. "You won't leave me, will you?" echoed repeatedly in his mind. The promises he had uttered were more than just words of comfort. They were vows he knew he couldn't break. The doctor approached, holding Emma's medical file in hand, his expression wary yet professional. "Miss O'Neal," he began, his voice low and serious, "Emma needs immediate intensive treatment. We've stabilized her for now, but she'll require a series of chemotherapy and radiation therapy to halt the spread of the cancer cells. The costs will be significant, not to mention the recovery process after treatment." She took a deep breath, his eyes locked on to the doctor. "Doctor, I don't care how much it costs. Do everything that needs to be done. Don't hold back on anything. Emma deserves a chance to live." The doctor nodded, slightly surprised by Shaq's determination. "I understand. We'll begin the treatment as soon as we have formal consent." She turned to Mrs. Margaret, who stood quietly nearby with tear-filled eyes. "Mrs. Margaret, I'll take care of all the expenses for Emma, and I want you to know that from now on she'll get everything she needs to get better." Mrs. Margaret was speechless, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, but all she could do was nod in gratitude. As the doctor prepared the paperwork, she stepped out of the room and pulled out his phone to contact his manager. He knew this decision would come with consequences. Once it became public, sure enough, his phone began buzzing incessantly. Jimmy, Shaq's longtime manager, was calling Shaq's side and answered. "Shaq, where are you?" Jim's voice was tense. "The press conference has already started, and you're the guest of honor. Hundreds of people are waiting for you." "Jamie Sher," replied, his voice calm but resolute. "I can't make it, can't make it," Jimmy nearly shouted over the phone. "Do you have any idea what this will do?" "Contract sponsors, your reputation." Shay interrupted, his tone firm and unyielding. "Jamie, I don't care about my reputation or contracts right now. There's a little girl fighting for her life, and I'm not leaving until I know she's getting all the help she needs." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Jimmy sighed, his voice softening. "I understand, but Shah, you know there will be consequences." Shah closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. "If there are consequences, I'll face them. But Jamie, sometimes we have to do what's right, even when it's not easy." When Shaq returned to the hospital room, Emma was awake. She turned her head weakly to look at him, her eyes lighting up. When she saw him enter, "You came back," she whispered. Shaq smiled and sat down beside her bed. "I told you, didn't I? I'm not leaving you." Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also tinged with fear. "I'm scared, Uncle Shaq. I don't know if I can make it." Shaq took her small hand, and his gaze steady and reassuring. "Listen to me, Emma. I know this isn't easy, but you're a brave little girl, and you're not fighting this alone. I'll be here every step of the way, every moment. You won't have to do this by yourself." Emma looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Speaks promise." Shah nodded, gripping her hand tightly. "I promise I'll be here until you're healthy again. This is a big game, and we're going to win." In that moment, amidst the steady beeping of machines and the cold hospital lighting, an invisible bond was formed. Shaq wasn't just a celebrity or a stranger who had happened to cross Emma's path. He had become her source of strength, her beacon of hope, and the companion she needed to face the difficult journey ahead. The bright white light from the hospital ceiling cast a clean yet chilling glow over the hallway. Shaquille O'Neal sat silently on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, his hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the still closed doors of the operating room beside him. Mrs. Margaret sat quietly, her tension evident in the way she clutched her worn-out handbag tightly. Shaq had faced countless high-stakes games in his basketball career, but never had he felt as powerless as he did now, with everything entirely out of his control. While he waited, his phone buzzed incessantly, texts, emails, and calls from his manager, business partners, and the media poured in. A message from Jimmy appeared on the screen. "Shaq, we need to talk. Yesterday's press conference caused some issues." Shah sighed, picking up the phone only to set it down again. couldn't let outside distractions invade his mind right now. Emma needed him, and this was where he had to be. You don't have to stay here all day. Mrs. Margaret finally broke the silence, her voice gentle yet full of gratitude. I know you have so many responsibilities. Just getting Emma here was more than enough. Shock turned to her, his gaze steady. No, Mrs. Margaret, Emma needs me. I'm staying, no matter how long it takes. Tears welled up in her eyes. You truly are a remarkable man. Miss O'Neill. Time seemed to drag on endlessly. Seconds turned into minutes, then hours. Every time the operating room doors swung open and nurses stepped out, Shah's heart would skip a beat, only to sink when they didn't approach with news about Emma. He began pacing the hallway, his enormous frame taking up most of the space. But no one else in the waiting area said a word. They simply watched the giant man, his face heavy with worry. Finally, after nearly four hours, the doors to the operating room opened. The surgeon stepped out, still in scrubs and mask, his eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and professionalism. She rushed forward, his eyes brimming with both hope and fear. How is Emma, doctor? The surgeon regarded him for a moment before pulling his mask down to reveal a weary but reassuring smile. The surgery was successful. We removed the tumor and the affected lymph nodes. But what? Shah's voice was tight with anxiety. The doctor sighed. Her condition has advanced to stage 3. This means we can't guarantee that all the cancer cells were eliminated. Emma will need extensive chemotherapy and radiation treatments to reduce the risk of recurrence. Shock took a deep breath, fighting to steady his emotions. He turned to Mrs. Margaret, who had her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. So there's still a chance for her, right? Shaq asked, his voice resolute. The doctor nodded yes. But it's going to be a long and difficult journey. Emma will need medical care and emotional support. Shay exhaled deeply, relief flooding his chest. Thank you, doctor. Do whatever it takes. We won't let her face this alone. When Shaq walked into the recovery room, he saw Emma lying on the hospital bed, her eyes closed, her small face pale, but seemingly at peace. The machines around her beeped steadily, a reassuring reminder that she was still fighting. Shah leaned down and took her frail hand in his. It was cold to the touch, but he felt a surge of emotion coursing through him. Emma, he whispered as if she could hear him. I promised I'd be here, and I'll keep that promise. You're going to get better. I know it. Even though the surgery had gone well, Shaq understood this was only the beginning. A tough, grueling road lay ahead, not just for Emma, but for him as well. Yet in his heart there was no room for doubt. He had made a promise to fight alongside her, and nothing would stop him from keeping it. Shaquille O'Neal sat in the hospital room, his gaze fixed on Emma, who was sound asleep. The steady beeping of the medical machine surrounding her brought a slight sense of reassurance. But deep inside, Shock, a fire had ignited, not one of anxiety, but of determination. He knew that getting Emma through her surgery was just the first step. Chemotherapy and radiation awaited her, along with the mental and physical challenges no child should face alone. But Shaq realized it wasn't just Emma that troubled him. Behind her story was a larger picture of a struggling community, silent in the face of need. Mrs. Margaret entered the room, her face weary, but her eyes lighting up as she saw Shock by Emma's side. Emma will be okay, she said softly, attempting a smile. Thank you for being here for her. Shock turned to her, his expression serious and reflective. Mrs. Margaret, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, not just about Emma, but about your orphanage and the other kids there. I want to do more. Mrs. Margaret tilted her head, slightly surprise evident in her eyes. You've already done so much. Miss O'Neill, bringing Emma here and covering her expenses is something we'll never forget. Shock shook his head, his voice firm. Helping just Emma isn't enough, Mrs. Margaret. I want to help all the children at your orphanage, and not just stop there. I want to make sure no child ends up in Emma's situation without someone to step in. Mrs. Margaret stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. You mean? Shay straightened in his seat, his large hands resting on his knees, his expression resolute. I want to establish a charity, an organization that not only supports children with critical illnesses, but also improves the living conditions for kids in your orphanage. Mrs. Margaret froze, her trembling hands covering her mouth. Mr. O'Neill, do you really mean this? It's going to cost a fortune, and money isn't the issue. Shaq interrupted, his voice unwavering. I've been fortunate to have a successful career in a life many dream of, but none of that matters if I can't use it to help those who need it the most. I want to build a place where no child has to be afraid anymore. A few days later, after Emma had been moved to a general ward, Shaq arranged a private meeting with Mrs. Margaret in the hospital's administrative office. "What does your orphanage need?" Shaq asked directly, his focus unbroken. Mrs. Margaret hesitated for a moment before pulling out a worn folder with aged documents. "We need everything. Our facilities are falling apart. The rooms are unsafe. We don't have a medical room, and our daily meals rely on small donations. Sometimes we even have to cut back on meals to save costs." She flipped through the papers, the images of cracked walls and rusted metal beds burning into his mind. A quiet anger brewed within him, not at Mrs. Margaret or anyone at the orphanage, but had a system that allowed vulnerable children to live in such conditions. "We're going to change this, Shaq," said his voice low and commanding. "I'll fund the renovation of the orphanage, but I want to do more. I'll find a larger, safer plot of land. We'll build a new facility fully equipped with a medical room and a playground for the kids." Mrs. Margaret's eyes widened, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mr. O'Neill, this is unbelievable. Why are you doing this?" Shaq smiled, his gaze softening. "Because of Emma, because every child deserves a chance, and because I know I can." In the weeks that followed, Shaq began detailed planning. He held meetings with contractors, lawyers, and friends in the financial world. To kick off the charity, he named the organization Shaq's House of Hope, as a pledge that every child deserves a safe home and a brighter future. But not everything went smoothly. Some of Shaq's business partners started expressing concerns about his new priorities. They feared he was losing focus on his personal career and endorsement deals. A few even warned that this could harm his brand image. In a tense meeting, one branding executive candidly remarked, "Shah, we respect what you're doing, but you can't solve all the world's problems. You're a sports and entertainment icon, not a full-time philanthropist." Shah stood up, his towering presence filling the room. He looked each person in the eye and spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "I built my name to create impact, and this is how I choose to use it. If this makes any of you uncomfortable, I'm prepared to face the consequences, but I will not turn my back on the children who need me." The room fell silent, and no one could find the words to challenge him further. Shaq left the meeting with even greater determination. He knew it wasn't just Emma, but an entire community depending on him, and he wouldn't let them down. When he returned to the hospital, he stopped by Emma's room. She was sitting up in bed playing with a picture book. Mrs. Margaret had brought her. Shah walked in, his face lighting up with a smile. "Emma,